Hi, can people hear me? Just wondering if people can hear me. I just want to check audio levels for this. I just want to check audio levels. Okay, that sounds good. We'll begin shortly. We'll begin in a few minutes. Okay, why don't we begin? At this point, there are only a couple people tuned in, it looks like, but that may change. Why don't we get started, anyways? My name is Russ Weninger. I'm an immigration lawyer with Weninger Jong, and today I'm going to be providing some immigration updates, talking about Canadian immigration. Some pitfalls, some strategies with the process, and I'll also be answering viewer questions. So if you have any questions at any point, feel free to enter them into the live chat feature, and I'll be happy to respond to those questions. So as I mentioned, my name is Russ Weninger. I'm an immigration lawyer with Weninger Jong. I should probably tell you a little bit about myself. I have been practicing law for several years now, over 10 years. Actually, it's going on 13 years that I've been practicing law. Went to Dalhousie Law School. For those of you who don't know where Dalhousie is, it's in Halifax, Nova Scotia, just an absolutely beautiful city. I loved my time in Halifax. I did my undergraduate degree right here in Lethbridge, right here in Alberta at the University of Lethbridge. Currently, I'm living in Calgary. I'm practicing law in Calgary, and my practice areas are primarily immigration law and wills and estates. I should tell you a little bit about myself as a person. So lately, I don't know if people are familiar with the show King of the Hill, but I've turned into the main character on King of the Hill. I'm fixated on my lawn. I'm always out there watering, and I'm not sure if it's a COVID-19 thing or if it's an excuse to get out of the house, or I think that might be it. But so my latest project is to try to do as much as possible to improve the quality of my lawn. So to improve the soil quality, to get rid of the weeds, to make the lawn nice and thick and green and give it that manicured sort of look. And it's a real work in progress because the soil quality in our yard isn't that great. And there are weeds all over the place on the lawn. And even though it's kind of a smaller yard, I actually have a fair bit of lawn space to work with because I'm on a boulevard, or I'm on a corner lot, and there's a boulevard for the lot, so I have to basically mow city property, look after city lawn, and I've been doing that diligently for a few years now, but I've really been focusing on it over the last couple of months, trying to get the lawn looking as nice as possible. I know that's not terribly interesting. It's not a super exciting fact about me, but yeah, lately I've been turning into Hank Hill from King of the Hill. I don't know if any of you have any tips for lawn care out there, but if you do, I'd be happy to hear them. Right now, I'm working with I'm trying to fertilize the lawn, and I think part of the problem is the roots might not be that great in the lawn. I think so in fertilizer there's nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And what I think I need to do is boost the phosphorus content in fertilizing the lawn. And I've been trying to figure out how to do that. I've been trying to go organic and using compost and and manure and stuff like that. But yeah, down the road, I might have to switch to some sort of non-organic fertilizer. But I'm not really sure about that. So if you have any suggestions, I'm by no means a horticulturalist or an expert in lawn care. So if you have any suggestions for how I can improve my lawn, feel free to reach out to me. Put it in the live chat or send me an email or something like that. So that's my latest personal project that I'm working on is kind of resurrecting the sorry state of my lawn. Actually, at the moment, the lawn looks really good because we've had a lot of rain in Calgary. So I'm getting a lot of grass growing and it's nice and green. But that's kind of a temporary thing. As soon as the moisture goes away and when it gets really hot, then I'm concerned that it'll start turning yellow again and the weeds will come out. So anyway, enough about the lawn. You didn't come here to hear about my lawn. Today I'm going to. Before I get into what I'm going to be discussing today, I want to give a shout out to my student, my articling student, Sunny Liu. Sunny has been diligently working for me for several months now. She is the go-to person for immigration applications for most of my clients at the moment. And because she's working so diligently on clients' files, that allows me to spend more time doing things like this webinar series. So thank you very much, Sunny, for helping out with that. And yeah, a little bit of housekeeping before we get into the webinar. I will be talking about immigration law today, but I won't be talking about other areas of law. And the focus is on Canadian immigration law too. I'm not licensed to practice immigration law anywhere else in the world. So I only really know about Canadian immigration law, and that's Canadian immigration law outside of the province of Quebec, with a focus on Alberta as well. So if you ask me some question about Saskatchewan, I might not really know that either, but I'll try my best. But Quebec, I won't even, hazard a guess for that. Although I should mention, I read an article recently that Quebec had made its immigration requirements more stringent recently. So for people who are interested in maybe immigrating to Quebec, that's something to think about. You definitely want to have a chat with an immigration lawyer in Quebec if you're thinking about immigrating to that province. So the focus today will be on Canadian immigration law. I won't be discussing other areas of law like employment law or landlord-tenant law or criminal law or anything like that. Focus is going to be on immigration law. I'm not going to talk about my firm or the services we offer either, or fees or anything like that. I broke that rule last week in the webinar, kind of accidentally. I got talking about my colleague Kathy Chong, and I went on, and it sounded like it was a plug for the firm. I was talking about practice areas and all that sort of stuff. So and I think the problem was I forgot to do this housekeeping segment where I talked about what I would and would not discuss, and so I'm going to try to make a point of that in webinars going forward as a mental reminder to me to keep the focus on what you folks are interested in. Now, what I should mention too, if you do have any questions, I'm happy to answer those questions, but try not to have those questions be about too much about you specifically. So so I don't want people asking very personal questions about their circumstances, because this is a public forum. This is YouTube. Uh, After this live stream, this is going to be archived on YouTube, so it's going to be up there indefinitely. So I don't want people to ask questions or to reveal stuff about themselves that might, be publicly viewable by others. So just a warning there. And I won't be answering those sorts of questions if I think that they will reveal the identity of a person, or that it's going into too specific details about people. Another thing I should mention is that when I'm doing this sort of webinar, when I'm giving this sort of information, it's based on my personal knowledge at the time, and immigration rules can change. I might not have all the facts. I might actually be incorrect about something. In the past, I've said things on these webinars that have turned out to be incorrect later on. So, where the rules have changed, and so what I thought was the case turned out to no longer be the case. And so, anything you see on this, I like to think my content is reasonably accurate, but anything I say you should take with a grain of salt, and you shouldn't be treating these webinars, hopefully. In some cases, maybe people can't afford to get legal representation, but there is really no substitute for having a chat with a lawyer, and like a one-on-one actual client consultation with a lawyer, or getting a lawyer to help you with an application from start to finish. So don't use these webinars as a substitute for actual legal advice with a lawyer, such as myself. Maybe you'll come to me, maybe you'll go to another lawyer. It doesn't really matter to me. But I strongly recommend that you don't just take everything I say here as gospel. And what I'm saying might not actually be applicable to your particular circumstances anyways. Everyone has particular circumstances that are unique to them, and so sometimes that can change the analysis a little bit. And so nothing I'm saying today or in any of these webinars should be construed as legal advice, because for it to be proper legal advice, there has to be that kind of one-on-one relationship, basically, with the lawyer and client, and the lawyer should ideally be digging deeper into the context of the person's situation. So I'm providing information here, information about immigration law. And I'm making suggestions and things like that, but this isn't immigration advice that's tailored to your particular circumstances. So don't consider it to be that. I strongly recommend anyone tuning in to if they need some help with an immigration application, to reach out to a lawyer. But I'm happy to provide this free information to folks out there, and I'm hopeful it is beneficial, and oftentimes I think what it can do is maybe help steer people in the right direction, or give them some food for thought. So that's kind of my intention with this webinar series. Yeah, so today it's not really going to be that structured. I'm going to be kind of giving an overview of updates about things that have happened recently in Canadian immigration law and policy and procedure, and we'll discuss those updates. If people have questions about that, like I said, reach out, put it in the chat feature. The biggest thing to note, I think, recently, post-pandemic, so since, let's say, mid-March, when things started to shut down, borders started to shut down, government offices started to shut down, things like that. Now, the law really hasn't changed that much. There have been subtle minor changes to the law and to to legislation and things like that, but procedurally and policy-wise, things have changed quite substantially. So practically speaking, there have been some huge changes, even though, if you look at black letter law, if you look at what's in the, the immigration legislation under the Immigration Refugee Protection Act or the Immigration Refugee Protection regulations, there's not, there haven't been substantial changes yet. But practically speaking, in terms of policy and in terms of procedure and things like that, there have been monumental changes. And so things that were possible, a few months ago, and things that are still in theory possible, might not be possible. And I'll give you some examples. So traveling to Canada, applying for a visa, you can still submit a visa application. You can still apply for an electronic travel authorization to come to Canada. Now, the question is, though, will you be able to get to Canada? Will you actually be able to set foot in Canada? And the answer is probably not. And there are a couple of reasons for that. One is just at the visa application stage. So when people apply for a visa to come to Canada, they typically have to apply for what's called biometrics. So they have to do biometrics. So they have to basically go to a special center that will record certain information, biometric information about them. And this is a fairly new thing. This has been going on for a few years now. That Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada has been collecting this information, but lately it's been mandatory for most, in most cases, for entering Canada temporarily, and also for acquiring permanent resident status in Canada. So people now have to do biometrics in most cases. There are some exceptions, but in most cases, people have to do biometrics to even travel to Canada if they're from a country where visas were required, or if they want to apply for a work permit or a study permit, or if they want to apply for permanent residence. And it's very, very, very hard to do biometrics these days in the post-COVID-19 world. So if you look at places where biometrics have been done or are being done, I mean, historically, biometrics were being done in what are called visa application centers, VACs, VACs. And VACs are basically these, it's largely done by a company, maybe exclusively done by a company called VFS Global, that runs these visa application centers. So they're private contractors or a private contractor that has a contract with the federal government to basically take in visa applications and perform certain functions like doing biometric or recording biometric information. So so right now, a lot of these offices are closed around the world, and so you simply can't get your biometrics done. And in some cases, these offices might be open, but you know, in your country, maybe the office isn't open, and so if you want to apply for a visa, you can do so, but at some point they're going to request biometrics from you in order to finalize the application. And if you can't do it in your own country, you might have to travel to another country, but then because a lot of borders are shut down, you might not be able to get to that other country to do the biometrics. So to make a long story short, it's very difficult to do biometrics these days because of the COVID-19 situation. And so practically speaking, this is a real impediment to a person who wants to travel to Canada. And I mention this because a lot of people are considering maybe leaving Canada and coming back. So a lot of people, maybe they still have a valid work permit or a valid study permit, but they can't study at the moment or they can't work at the moment, and they're thinking, well, maybe I should go back to my home country. You can do that. You can possibly do that if you're able to get a flight back to your home country. But one thing you should think about is when you'll be able to get back to Canada. And so there, so aside from the problem with biometrics and visa application centers being closed and things like that, there's the issue of actually getting on a plane to come to Canada. And there are occasional flights to Canada from different destinations in the world. Those flights tend to be reserved, though, for Canadian citizens and permanent residents, though. It's very difficult to get on a flight to come to Canada if you're not a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident. In theory, work permit holders, certain study permit holders, spouses of Canadians and permanent residents, other family members, certain other family members of Canadians and permanent residents. In theory, they should be able to travel to Canada, but practically speaking, airlines are not boarding many people who might otherwise be able to travel to Canada unless they're a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident. So so that's something to keep in mind, that there are all these practical impediments to people traveling to Canada. So so in some cases, I'm having questions from people. People are contacting my office or reaching out to me, and they're wanting to bring a relative here or a spouse or they themselves, they left Canada prior to the pandemic, but they still have a valid work permit or they still have a valid study permit, and they want to return to Canada. And the practical reality at the moment is that getting back to Canada, if you're not a Canadian Canadian citizen or a permanent resident, that's easier said than done at the moment. And it's not necessarily to do with immigration law per se. It's to do with these practical issues of you know, being able to get on a plane or being able to do biometrics and things like that. So practically speaking, it's very, very, very difficult to actually come to Canada at the moment. There's also the issue of kind of you know, the processing of applications. So The government is still processing most applications, but they may be doing it at a snail's pace, particularly applications for overseas visa posts. So things like visitor visas to travel to Canada, overseas work permit applications, overseas study permit applications, those sorts of things. I think they're being processed at a snail's pace at the moment, because most Canadian employees of overseas visa offices, they're still working, but they're working from home, and they're working from home in Canada. So most of them have been repatriated back to Canada, and so I think it's going to be very difficult to have many of those visa applications from overseas visa offices. It's gonna be difficult to have them processed to completion, and if they are processed to completion, it'll probably take a lot longer than you might normally expect. They have processing times posted on the Canadian government website, so IRCC website. It lists processing times for a number of different application types, but the problem there, when you see those processing times, is that it's largely based on historical data. So recent statistics about, processing times. It's based on that, and the timelines you'll see are for the bulk of applications. So when you see that it takes, let's say, 5 weeks to process a work permit application or something like that, I'm not saying that's how long it takes, but let's say the website says it's taking 5 weeks to process a work permit application. What that really means is that recently, if you look at all work permit applications, 80% of those work permit applications have been processed within a 5-week period. So that's what it means on the website when it says it takes 5 weeks to process a work permit. I'm not saying it does say that, but I'm using that as an example. So, or it might say it takes 3 weeks to process a visa application, or it takes 8 weeks to process a study permit application or something. When it gives that information, it's just really a rough guess as to how long it might take, and it's based on historical statistics, and it doesn't include every single application. So it only applies to 80% of applications that are processed. So the remaining 20% of applications may take substantially longer than that period of time that's indicated on the website, for example. Oftentimes, clients or people who reach out to me, they'll have this expectation that if it says it takes 5 weeks on the website, then that's exactly what it takes. And if it's a day over 5 weeks, then they're contacting CIC and they're saying, well, where's my permit, or where's my whatever. The problem is the website isn't a guarantee, and those processing times that are published on the website, those are just guesstimates, basically. So that's something to be aware of, and take all of that with a grain of salt. I'm not sure that in the current environment, in the COVID-19 era, that those processing times mean anything at all. They're probably based on pre-COVID-19 statistics, and so really take that with a grain of salt. So what are the impediments again to traveling to Canada? Well, there's the issue of getting biometrics done. I think in most cases that's virtually impossible at the moment. If you're lucky enough to get biometrics done, or maybe you don't need biometrics because you've already had your biometrics done in the past, there's the issue of the processing of overseas applications, or even applications from within Canada. It's very slow going, or it's probably very slow going in most cases for application processing. So that's another impediment. And then the third impediment just involves being able to get on a plane to come to Canada. So unless you're lucky enough to be a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident, and even if you are, or I mean, if you were a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident, you probably wouldn't be watching this webinar, or be that interested in the contents of this webinar. But yeah, it's only really Canadian citizens and permanent residents that can relatively easily access these flights to return to Canada. And that's a restriction put in place by airlines in most cases, rather than Canada Border Services. But Canada Border Services, the Canada Border Services Agency, CBSA, they've also been applying their own restrictions. So that's a fourth restriction. So there's the problem of biometrics. There's the problem of visa application processing. There's a problem of getting even being able to get on a flight to Canada. But let's say you get a flight to Canada and you arrive here at a port of entry, or you travel to the land border. You're in the U.S. and you're traveling up to Canada. At that point, Canada Border Services may in fact say, look, we're only allowing Canadians and permanent residents to enter, and people who meet certain special exemptions. So essentially, CBSA is testing people to see if they're coming to Canada for an essential purpose. They want to make sure that people who are coming into Canada, they're not just coming here for tourism or family visits, or because they think Canada's neat, or they want to maybe explore the job market or something like that. They want people to be coming here because they have Canadian family members that they're going to live with going forward, and that they are planning on staying with those people indefinitely or permanently. So if it's just a question of coming and visiting a child or a spouse or something like that, but you don't plan on staying indefinitely, you just plan on staying for a few weeks or something like that, they're going to turn you away. They're going to say, no, forget it. Your purpose for travel is too frivolous. And that's a tough pill to swallow for a lot of people. Really, is it that frivolous to want to spend some time with a spouse or an ailing parent or someone like that? But yeah, from CBSA's perspective at the moment, given the situation of the pandemic, unless you have some urgent, compelling, long-term reason for being in Canada, then you shouldn't be coming to Canada. And when they look at workers who are trying to enter Canada, they're looking at the purpose of the work too, and is it work in some sort of essential type of area like agriculture or food processing or the healthcare system or something like that, or is it work in the tourism industry, where the tourism industry is largely dead, or in, the restaurant industry, where the restaurant industry is largely, I shouldn't say dead, the tourism industry isn't dead, but it's largely dormant at the moment. That's a better way of putting it. Or the restaurant industry, where restaurants are kind of largely, they're probably minimally staffed at the moment, and operating at maybe 50% capacity if they're lucky. And people with open work permits, let's say working holiday type work permits, who don't yet have a job lined up, those sorts of people are going to be turned away by Canada Border Services right at the border. So there are these real practical impediments, even though in theory, in terms of kind of the letter of the law, you in theory could potentially enter Canada right now. There are all these impediments. So biometrics, the lack of the ability to get biometrics done, the lack of the ability to, have a visa processed in a timely fashion, the inability to board a plane, what was the other one? And then Canada Border Services own impediments. So there are 4 or 5 reasons why a person just simply can't get to Canada at the moment. So that's the practical reality of the situation. And if you're entertaining the possibility of leaving Canada, you should be aware of that. So if you're thinking of throwing in the towel because you've been laid off, or you miss your family and you want to travel back to your home country or something like that, it might make a lot of sense to do that. It might make a lot of sense to leave Canada right now, but be aware, you might not easily be able to get back into Canada. So that's the point I'm making there. It's quite difficult at the moment to actually travel here. Practically speaking, it's very difficult to travel. There was talk, the government early on in the pandemic announced that they were going to make it possible for family members of Canadians to travel to Canada. But then there were all these exceptions, and there were all these extra stipulations that were placed on that. And Canada Border Services, they have their own interpretation of who's entitled, as a family member to enter Canada. And so in many cases, spouses of Canadian citizens and permanent residents are finding it difficult to come to Canada to spend time with their Canadian citizen or permanent resident spouses. And the government, or I should say the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, recently made some comments to the effect that they're going to look at ways where they could possibly, help reunite Canadian spouses with their overseas spouses. But the focus there, so I had some clients reach out to me and say, well, hopefully this is going to make it easier for me to get back to Canada. But Prime Minister Trudeau's announcement was, it was just basically him musing about the possibility of in the future making it easier for spouses to come to Canada. So, it wasn't a concrete policy announcement or anything like that. And and it seemed to be limited to situations where Canadians had spouses living in the U.S. Because in a lot of cases, there are Canadians who live up in Canada, but they have an American spouse who maybe even has a separate residence in the U.S. and they visit each other from time to time, or the Canadian will go and live in the U.S. with their spouse for a while, and the American will come up to Canada to spend time with their Canadian spouse for a while. But that's been put on hold due to COVID-19, and so. Uh, Justin Trudeau's, um, uh, plan, kind of tentative, very undeveloped idea of helping these people, these, Canadian/American couples from reuniting in Canada. Uh, you know, it's limited in scope, probably only to those sorts of circumstances where the spouse is living in the U.S. So it's limited to that, um, but B, it's at this point quite undeveloped. So it's just kind of speculation about where policy might go in the near future. So at the moment, family reunification is still a very difficult thing to accomplish. So that's something to be aware of, that Canadians with spouses who are overseas, it might be a while before they're able to reunite with those spouses, unfortunately. So yeah, at this point, what I've talked about has been kind of a downer. I've been talking about how it's difficult and in many cases virtually impossible to travel to Canada. So the bottom line is, if you want to remain in Canada, if you're currently in Canada and you want to remain here, try to avoid leaving. Because if you do leave, who knows when you'll be able to come back. Or if you do decide to leave, be aware that it will likely be a long time before you're able to come back. There may be very good reasons for leaving Canada, but if you want to come back, you might have a long wait ahead of you before you can actually come back. And it's unrealistic to expect that the wait will be a matter of days or weeks or something like that. It might be several months, maybe even more than a year before you can travel back to Canada. So I thought it was important to note that occasionally I'll have a client reach out to me and they think that they should be able to travel to Canada within a few weeks or something like that, and practically speaking, that's not realistic. So travel to Canada is difficult. Applying for anything at the moment, you can expect to face delays. So even if you're currently in Canada, if you're applying for a work permit, if you're applying for permanent resident, whatever you're applying for, keep in mind that the immigration officer is processing your application. They're likely working from home, and in fact, I'm sure they're almost certainly working from home. Service Canada offices throughout and IRCC offices throughout Canada are basically closed at the moment. And that's something to note as well. If you're an employer looking to hire a foreign worker and you want to apply for a labor market impact assessment, or you're a foreign worker and you've got an employer lined up and you want to apply for something like an LMIA, or you want your employer to apply for something like an LMIA, in some cases they're talking about fast tracking LMIA applications and for certain types of workers, and in some cases they're talking about people being able to start working on a work permit, uh, or start being able to work as a worker without having even the work permit processed. Um, those are exceptional remedies for very specific circumstances, um, but in most cases, I think for someone who's just looking at doing an initial LMIA, getting an initial LMIA based work permit, it'll be difficult for them to get the LMIA processed in a timely fashion, because Service Canada employees are, many of them, probably they're multitasking at the moment. So they're working from home. So they're not only doing government work, but they're also making sure that their kids are doing their online school assignments and stuff like that. And believe me, that can take up a good chunk of a person's day. So so they're distracted by those sorts of things. Maybe they're working at home. They might be like me, where their spouse is also working from home, and so you have your spouse at home, your kids at home, and you're coordinating kind of work schedules and things like that, and internet usage and computer usage and stuff like that. And so these Service Canada employees, they're doing that, but they're also working in other areas of government. So, for example, the big thing that the government's undertaking at the moment is to provide all these benefits to people. The Canada Emergency Response Benefit, the CERB, and the wage subsidy benefit for small businesses, small and medium-sized businesses, and actually I think it applies even to larger businesses as well. Similar government type benefits. So they're processing those benefits at the moment, aside from doing LMIA applications or processing LMIA applications. Historically, Service Canada employees would kind of be in particular areas. So if you did one type of application processing, you probably weren't doing, another type of application processing. The responsibilities were kind of siloed. But now, I'm getting some questions. Okay. But now the situation is that these Service Canada officers are doing different things and processing different applications. So, and these other things like the CERB and the government benefits and stuff like that, those are keeping the economy afloat. So that's kind of the priority of the Canadian government at the moment, is to process that sort of stuff, the benefit applications and things like that. So to make a long story short, the LMIA application that you might be waiting to be processed, it might take a while for that to be processed. I don't do a lot of LMIA work, and in fact, in most cases, I don't do it at all. I tend to avoid LMIA applications just because I find it creates more problems than they're worth. But so I'm not really familiar with normal processing times for LMIAs, but I just, those LMIA application processing times will go up in most cases. So it might take a while to get the LMIA process, but even if you get the LMIA, then to get the work permit, if you're lucky, you have an existing work permit in Canada that hasn't yet expired. And so then you can apply for a new work permit by applying to extend your status as a worker. But if this is the first work permit you're applying for example, or or maybe you previously had a work permit, but then you went to visitor status or something like that, or um, you're not going to be able to have your work permit processed inland. You'll probably have to uh, apply for the work permit through an overseas visa office, and we already talked about how it's difficult to get anything processed through an overseas visa office, or you'll have to travel to a port of entry to have the work permit issued. But the problem is right now, uh, they the government. So another practical impediment is that the officers, the Canada Border Services officers who work at land border crossings and work at ports of entry, they don't want to be processing those work permit applications, and they don't want to be, especially at land border crossings, they don't want to be doing what's called flag polling, or they don't want to be participating in that process. So flag polling is when someone drives down to the border to apply for a new work permit or a new study permit or something like that. And under at the best of times, that's kind of a risky prospect, and it's not always advisable to do that. But right now, Canada Border Services their policy is that they don't want people flag polling at all, and that they're not going to be, providing flag polling services to people. So if you come down specifically, you drive to Montana or something like that, just so that you can do a work permit application, the government's going to turn you away. So practically speaking, it's going to be difficult in many cases to apply for a new work permit in Canada unless you already have a work permit in Canada. But even if you're able to apply within Canada and you don't have to leave Canada to get your new work permit, even if that's the case, you might be faced with a bit of a wait to have your work permit application processed. So even if your employer gets the LMIA, and that might take a while, and I already discussed that, how Service Canada employees are working on a bunch of different things at the moment, and most of it's related to keeping the Canadian economy afloat. So that's where their priorities are lying. But even if your employer can get the LMIA processed, the actual work permit might take a while to arrive. Now, in some cases, people can start working without the work permit arriving yet, but those are kind of very specific, exceptional sort of circumstances. So that's something to keep in mind. Let's see what Aaron was asking. So Aaron said, hi, I'm not sure if this was already asked as I just joined in, but is AINP provides application status if they provided you a file number and acknowledged receipt of your AOS application? Okay. For example, they received your application February 27th, and based on their website, they're processing application received on March 16th. Thank you. Oh, okay. So you're asking a question about whether they're reaching out to people with file numbers and stuff like that. I think they are. Yeah. I've had AINP corresponding with clients recently. I had someone I did a consultation with a few months ago recently get a nomination under the AINP Express Entry stream. So AINP is processing applications, and they are reaching out to people and giving file numbers and things like that. Now, in your case, Aaron, who knows? It might be the case that they haven't gotten to your application yet, or maybe there's something they have to review on your application before they reach out to you, or it's hard to say what's happening with it in your particular case. but yeah, in general, AINP is continuing to process applications, and they are communicating with clients and providing them with things like file numbers and stuff like that. Win50 says, just saying hello, keep up the good work, Russ. Albert. Hey, Albert. Good chatting with you. Yeah, Albert he's an articling student at another firm. He did a little bit of volunteer work at my office recently, was tremendously helpful. Yeah, thanks so much, Albert, for your past contributions to my law practice, and yeah, hope to see you in the near future. Does anyone else have any questions at this point? Does anyone have any burning issues they'd like to discuss? Maybe someone has some lawn care tips for me. Maybe, yeah, who knows? Maybe someone has a suggestion for a Korean drama I can watch or something like that. What are people doing right now during the pandemic? Are people finding, and I'm not talking about, whether you're working or you're laid off or whatever, but I'm talking about, have you been exploring a new hobby, or have you taken up cooking, or so maybe let me know that too. I'm curious about that. Yeah, so to summarize, practically speaking, it's quite difficult for people to apply to come to Canada in the first place. But even if they're in Canada, I think it's going to be slow going to get things like new work permits, LMIAs, permanent residence application processed, ANP nominations processed. Those things will still happen. So the government hasn't completely shut down or anything like that. So applications are still being processed, but it'll be slow going, and there may be impediments to getting certain things because of the inability to do biometrics, for example. So keep that in mind. So Sunny has a question. Are student laws allowed to do the remote notarizations? That's a good question. I don't know, Sunny. I'm going to have to look into that. I would say maybe don't commit anything with a client at the moment until we look into that, because I think that might just apply to lawyers, and that might just apply to certain types of notarizations as well. So remote notarizations have been allowed for certain purposes, for example, real estate transactions, things like that. But there's not really a blanket across the board permission at this point to do remote notarization. So let me look into that, Sunny. But very good question. Yeah, one other thing I wanted to talk about today, just briefly, and we've only got maybe a couple minutes now, so I won't take a lot of time discussing this, but the real elephant in the room at the moment is all the Black Lives Matters protests and the anti-racism protests that have been happening around the world, and what that was initially based on was some Black people being murdered in the U.S. and in one case, the most recent case of George Floyd being suffocated by a police officer who knelt on his neck for 9 minutes, and he later died. And so this sort of racism, it's quite prevalent in the United States, but it's also, I think, prevalent in Canada as well. And people, especially immigrants, people who come from other countries, they tend to experience that firsthand. And so I think it's important to acknowledge that racism is a real thing, and it's still with us. It's not something that we've successfully overcome. It's still a part of our society, and we should acknowledge that and attempt to deal with that, and not just brush it off, and not get overly sensitive when people when I say overly sensitive, I'm talking about kind of the white majority, like people like me. People like me sometimes have a tendency to feel like their back's up against a wall when people are talking about racism, and us white people, we tend to get defensive and think that, well, we've cured racism. It's not a big deal anymore. So, why are people picking on white people? But racism is a problem. It's continuing to plague society, and if you practice immigration law, or if you're an immigrant, you're acutely aware of the very real presence of racism, and there's even institutional racism. So a couple of years ago, the Alberta Immigrant Nominee Program, for example, fortunately they changed this policy, but they were thinking of creating a requirement that that people would only be able to get a nomination if they had a certain family income level. And this was for all family members, not just the family members living in Canada, but the family members living overseas. And so what this policy effectively would have done, and unfortunately the government, I think they realized the problems with the policy and they got rid of it. But what it would have done was it would have basically favored people from affluent first world countries, mostly European countries, places like that, and really discriminated against people from poorer countries, the racialized third world countries, like African countries and the Philippines and places like that. And I hear from clients, and I believe it to be the case, that if you're someone from a third world country, you're even if you've got excellent credentials, an excellent work background, an excellent educational background, good job prospects, a good significant savings, you own property, all that sort of stuff, you're a lot less likely to be approved for a visa to come to Canada than you are if you're from a European country, an affluent first world country. If you're from a country where most of the people are white people, you might not even need a visa to travel to Canada. But if you're from a country where most people are Black or Hispanic or Asian, there's a good chance you'll need a visa to travel to Canada. So there's almost this built-in racism within the immigration system. And if you're dealing with a border officer, and you're a white speaking person who speaks the Queen's English and all that sort of stuff, you're likely to get a much easier go of it than if you're a non-white person who has a bit of an accent and maybe comes from a non-European country, for example. So racism is a real thing, and we have to acknowledge that, and we have to try to rid ourselves of that. So we have to remain vigilant. We have to be aware of it, and we have to not keep our heads in the sand about that fact. So I just wanted to mention that as well, that it's important, especially at this point in time, that we acknowledge the very real presence of racism in society, and that we don't just ignore it and look the other way and pretend it's not happening. Um, so on that note, I think I'll end things for today. Once again, I'd like to thank my student, Sunny Lou, for all the work she's been doing in my office. I was briefly in the office yesterday. Actually, I wasn't briefly. I was there for a number of hours, but I didn't even really speak to Sunny. I was just buried in my own work, and it's rare that I'll get to the office these days. But Sunny's been religiously going to the office and doing work for clients, and I've been mostly working remotely from home. So keep up the good work, Sunny. I really do appreciate your help. Albert, it was good to hear from you, and thank you for the work you've put in at my firm as well. It's greatly appreciated. I hope things are going well for you in your practice and in your studies as an articling student, and I hope things are going well for you in general. And I'd like to thank the viewers who tuned in today, and feel free to reach out to me if you have any additional questions. If you feel there's some content I can discuss in the future that will be beneficial to you or to others. And this webinar series, I plan to do it every week for the foreseeable future. I might take the odd break, but next week I'm planning on doing another webinar, same time, same place, so Wednesdays at 10 Mountain Standard Time. I hope to see you next week, and until then, bye for now, and thanks for watching. See you.